Also, what is the legal authority for strikes? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country. I was like, whoa, yes, queen. Did not see that, all right? She is just 180. She's defying her own administration. Hero, incredible. You don't often see that. And this is the press secretary. The press secretary to have the gall to do this, you know, to suddenly just call out the Biden administration for what it is in 2017. Oh, okay. So, this happened. I mean, some other things did happen. I'm going to speak of those things that happened. I mean, the House did just pass the $1.9 trillion COVID bill, so that's good. But then we got reminded of the good old days. The good old days, you know. The bombing days. Joe Biden ordered an attack on Syria.
And Biden ordered airstrikes in eastern Syria yesterday, targeting buildings used by Iranian-backed militias. It's the first military action taken by this commander-in-chief.
We're confident in the target that we went after. We know what we did.
The Pentagon said it was retaliation for a rocket attack in Iraq last week that killed a civilian contractor and wounded an American service member.
And we're confident that that target was being used by the same Shia militia that conducted the strikes.
The United States says it consulted with coalition partners before action was taken.
We allowed and encouraged the Iraqis to investigate and develop intelligence, and that was very helpful to us.
Last week's attack in the Iraqi city of Erbil also wounded several others.
One of them got brain injury and operated here and now under ventilator.
In a statement, the Pentagon said the operation sends an unambiguous message. President Biden will act to protect American and coalition personnel. Tensions had calmed since a tit-for-tat just over 1 year ago that included violent protests at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and a U.S. drone strike that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. An administration official told CBS News that the Syrian town of al-Bukamal was selected for yesterday's attack as part of a calibrated response to avoid provoking Iran to retaliate further. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, Washington.
Now, I know you just heard a lot of different names. There's a lot of different countries, and it may sound a little bit confusing, especially if you've been paying attention to U.S. geopolitics for the last little while. And when it comes to Iran, and when it comes to Syria, and when it comes to Saudi Arabia, complicated is probably the easiest way I could describe this. Now, I'm going to have to take off the leftist hat for a little while, all right? Remove that one and put on the pragmatic hat, because if I don't, people are going to accuse me of just trying to be like, well, Lance, what do you want? Do you want the United States to just disassemble its entire war mechanism and end the U.S. military? And do you want it to just completely defund its military? And then all of a sudden it's going to like end all its occupations in other countries? And do you think that's pragmatic? Do you think that's a pragmatic way to deal with any of this? Because what's going to happen? To be truthful, yes, tomorrow, if the United States suddenly disassembled all of its military apparatus, the Great War Machine, if you will, it would leave what is called a vacuum, a power vacuum, which would be filled, unfortunately, by other actors. And so the alternative is not that we have to continue business as usual, because I think it's decidedly, what's the technical, fucked, decidedly fucked. So that's not it. That's not it. But I'm also not going to sit here and be like, well, we need to live in a world where there is no war. And I'm going to start that tomorrow, as should all of you, as should everyone, and then the problems will be solved as well. There's no question. There's bad people out there. There's horrible people. Bashar al-Assad happens to be one of those horrible people. He's monstrous in some of the things that he's done. And there's no question that the civil war in Syria has unfortunately had a number of casualties, which rank in the hundreds of thousands. I think at this point, it's definitely a humanitarian crisis. And the fact that a whole bunch of larger players have suddenly turned this from a civilian war into a proxy war, looking at you, Russia, looking at you, United States, is not going to help the situation at all. At all, especially the saber rattling the United States has been doing for a long time now in terms of their opposition to Iran. Is Bashar al-Assad an absolute monster? No question. And the world is riddled with absolute monsters. Saddam Hussein was a monster. Gaddafi was a monster. So was George Bush. So was Donald Rumsfeld. So was Winston Churchill. You know, there's a lot of monsters in the world, and sometimes one monster is a monster only after they become a monster. Before they become monsters, sometimes they're strategic allies. Sometimes they're really good friends. That's the reason you have pictures of Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. It's not because it was doctored. It was because there was a time when he was considered an ally, an asset, if you will, is probably a better way of putting it. The same thing applies to a lot of the baddies. It's weird to think sometimes that Osama bin Laden had some CIA training, or that George Bush would outsource torture to the Syrian regime. Those things are very, very horrible, and obviously they're all bad. But to say solely that if a monster is operating in a country, that then it becomes the purview of the United States. The United States then has to begin to intervene, if you will. And that has nothing to do with trying to maintain geopolitical hegemonic control over that region, especially over the Middle East, one of the largest resources for energy, fuel, oil in the world, I think would be a little bit short-sighted, right? As people who like to use thesaurus to say myopic. It would be myopic, because there's a lot of monsters in the world that the United States doesn't give a fuck about. Doesn't give an absolute fuck about. I could bring up a whole bunch. In fact, some of them are being persecuted right now in international courts. Like, let's check this out for just 1 second. I know it's a bit of a derail, but International Criminal Court convicts Ugandan warlord. The International Criminal Court in The Hague Thursday convicted a Ugandan child soldier turned Lord's Resistance Army commander of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Presiding Judge Bertram Schmidt announced the verdict, saying the 45-year-old Dominican Ongwen was found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of 61 charges related to the reign of terror in the early 2000s, including widespread rape, sexual enslavement, child abductions, torture, murder, including the killing of babies. Now, this is happening in lots of different countries in the world. It's very, very unfortunate that there are warlords who are engaging in horrific crimes, both against humanity and their own populace. And there's also a reason why there isn't, let's just say, a consistent United States occupation of these countries for the purpose of maintaining hegemonic control. There's a reason a lot of that takes place in other parts of the world. Now, I'm not saying that we're supposed to absolve Assad of any of the monstrous things he does. They are absolutely vile. One of the reasons I use the term monstrous, right? Gassing your own people is a crime against humanity, and it's horrifying. I'm not trying to downplay it. I am trying to say that there's a reason the United States picks its targets, to say the very least. Here's the other thing, by the way, and could we not forget this? Biden, if he's going to commit acts of war, is supposed to seek congressional approval. Now, I know that no one does that anymore. I know that just harkens to the good old days, and I know that Trump certainly didn't, when he was just like, I'm going to bomb the fucking general. I'm going to drop the mother of all bombs. But it really seems that the Republicans, their branding of all this is usually just like, fuck yeah, America, mother of all bombs, we're going to destroy some shit. But it still continues to be business as usual under the Democrats in terms of foreign policy in the Middle East, except now it's been touted as being very strategic, very specialized drone strikes into key areas. You have to remember that the rise of Bashar al-Assad came after the Arab Spring. And while there was a whole bunch of countries undergoing revolutions of their own, Bashar al-Assad saw what had been happening in other parts of that region and decided to crack down very, very hard, as in, immediate military strikes on his own people to try and stop a civilian uprising. That civilian uprising, of course, started to get other players in amongst the entire thing. Yeah, if anyone doesn't know this, the rise of Bashar al-Assad and the current Syrian civil war started after the Arab Spring. During the Arab Spring, there was a whole bunch of different civilian uprisings that were taking place, and a handful of them were supported by various other larger players, which is usually the case in these kind of proxy wars. And then Bashar al-Assad, unlike some of his contemporaries, decided to crack down upon dissidents and revolutions in his own country, of course, through military force. That resulted in, of course, other players coming into the picture, which makes the entire thing complicated. Now, if you want to ask me for a pragmatic solution to all this, there isn't a quick prescriptive anything to this. This is incredibly complicated. You have to remember that there's a couple of things going on here when it comes to Iran. Iran is not, their populace is not, they're Persian, for example. So there's an ethnic component into that in the region. They're also a religious minority. This is, again, the Shia versus the Sunni problem when it comes to the Muslim religion. This is, of course, the difference between the two factions of Muslims, and their differences are in who is the successor or who was the successor to Muhammad. The other aspect with the Shia minority, because they are the smaller by a very large proportion. Someone can correct me on this, but I think it's something like 80% to 20% between the two. But they're also usually intertwined with the concept of revolutionary and movements of peoples, which seems very strange to have religious orthodoxy mixed in with these concepts of revolution. But the two are intertwined as well, which is why there has been, such as the original Iranian uprising, which was actually the second uprising, but the second successful Iranian uprising, which resulted in the implementation of the Ayatollah, and that entire system, which has both led to a fairly repressive regime in terms of its civil rights. There's no question about that. It's 85 to 90 sunny. Oh wow, 85 to 90. I was off by about 5%. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Anyways, the reason that I'm mentioning all these kind of things, and if your mind is swimming right now, don't worry. There's probably a 5-minute video, animated one that could explain this way better than I could. The long story short of it is that this is an incredibly complicated situation involving tons of players, a lot of players, both globally. As soon as superpowers start putting their nose into this entire issue, it became more complicated. It became a proxy war, and of course, it's also playing into the war that is overflowing into the potential saber rattling the United States is doing towards Iran. The Iranian connection to this entire thing, of course, involves Hezbollah, an organization that Iran had started to push back against forces that were encircling it. Now, I'm not here to say that I am a supporter of Hezbollah. That could not be further from the truth. I find a lot of the things they do abhorrent. I'm also not a fan of the Syrian regime. I'm not a fan of Bashar al-Assad. What I would be more privy to, or what I am kind of looking forward to, is not repeating the same actions which are getting definitively worse consequences. If we want to talk about monstrosities, the Iraq invasion by the United States, which has resulted in over 500,000 dead children, civilians, casualties, we have to remember that those numbers, they kind of roll off your tongue. I say them out loud, but those figures are astronomical. Like over 500,000 dead civilians is something that if you'd heard another country perform that, you would be aghast. You would be absolutely aghast. And yes, it did not happen all at once. It wasn't like a single bomb was dropped. But the fact that that did happen, and the fact that in the power vacuums that the United States has created by doing that, we've gotten new groups such as ISIS, ISIL, if they're rebranding themselves on a regular basis. These things are not happening by themselves. These things are happening because of the abject failures of U.S. foreign policy in the region, and have been for a while. And one of the only things that I could say that the U.S. has done right in this, and I know this is where I'm going to piss off all the tankies, is supporting the Kurds for as long as they did. The Kurdish people, of course, are one of the best factions that have been fighting both on the behalf of the civilians that are trying to liberate themselves from the Assad regime, as well as fighting some of the real baddies in that area, like Al-Qaeda, like fragments of ISIS and stuff like that. And also, while at the same time, the Kurdish people, who are, by the way, a uniformly socialist state enacted themselves, or at least they're trying to get recognition for it. They're trying to do this while at the same time avoid complete genocide and decimation by the Turkish government, which are trying to do that at the same time as all this. That's like, I don't know what you would call this, proto-Ottoman empireism, but whatever Turkey has been trying to do at the same time is basically decimate the Kurds for reasons, and at the same time, their only reason for not being able to completely achieve that had been a lot of support from the United States. The United States supporting the Kurds militarily is something that I can get back. I can get behind. The United States then withdrawing that support after the Kurds had done so much in terms of fighting their really shitty wars for them is just reprehensible, but it's not something that I would put past, the things that Trump had done. Anyways, when it comes to the Biden administration bombing Syria, and I like how Jackman worded this whole thing before raising the minimum wage. President Biden, 1 month into his term, greenlighted the first military action of his administration, the airstrikes in Syria. The administration claims required no congressional vote because they were deployed in self-defense, even though the action was a response to the targeting of U.S. occupying forces in Iraq and Syria. That is true. The airstrikes themselves should not come as a surprise to anyone who's followed Biden's long career as a foreign policy hawk, albeit the hawk who is under the cover of liberal interventionism. Syria is a perfect case in point, using the legitimate outrage against Bashar al-Assad's genocidal policies to justify an intervention that only leads to more human suffering and bigger geopolitical footprints for the U.S. military. This is the problem. And this is the problem when people are like, well, yeah, but Bashar al-Assad, do you support Bashar al-Assad? Because there's two ways about this. The guy uses sarin gas on children. Do you support that? Because if you don't support Biden, you support that. because we just live in a binary world where there's just one of two options. You either have to support one or the other. There's no two ways about it. Or on the flip side, it's people who are like, well, yeah, do you support the imperialism of the United States? Well, then how dare you? How dare you? How dare you say anything about this? Bashir al-Assad was not a bad guy, all right? Those are all just U.S. propaganda from PSYOPs, and it's just because you are completely watching MSNBC every single day and Fox News that you've been indoctrinated to believing these lies, these huge lies, right? Yeah, nuance is for nerds. Fucking nerds showing nuance. God damn.
The decision to strike was taken at the very top. After days of consultation with his national security teams, President Biden ordered the attack, which took place on early Thursday evening DC time. This apparently in retaliation for a series of recent attacks by militia groups in Lebanon and Iraq, one of which killed a U.S. contractor.
We're confident in the target that we went after. We know what we did.
I just don't want to play his statement again. Okay, we have new statements. Let's hear these.
Was conducted together with diplomatic measures, including consultation with coalition partners.
This claim of acting in a restrained way echoed by the Secretary of State.
We took this action that I think was focused, proportionate, but also effective in degrading some of the capacity that the militia in question had to perpetrate new...
It's so much better having the Dems in power, because I like how they word things, you know? Like, they don't have child camps. They have containment facilities, and they don't have military drone strikes. They have precision targeting. It's much nicer. It's better. It's cleaner. I like it. It just rolls off the tongue, you know? It's pretty good. So I was surprised that Jen Psaki actually took a decided, immediately in the face of Biden, was like, you know what, fuck this. I'm not standing for this, and tweeted this out. Also, what is the legal authority for strikes? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country. I was like, whoa, yes, queen. Did not see that, all right? She is just 180. She's defying her own administration. Hero, incredible. You don't often see that. And this is the press secretary. The press secretary to have the gall to do this, you know, to suddenly just call out the Biden administration for what it is in 2017. Oh, okay. So this is actually just complete hypocrisy. And it's basically her saying that when Trump did it, it was bad. It's a bad thing when Trump did it. Shame on you, Trump. You warmonger, huh? I mean, yeah, Syria is fucking a bad place with Bashir al-Assad, but there's still a sovereign country. What, are you just going to bomb a sovereign country? Do you know what happens if someone tried to bomb the United States? Like, if someone tried to bomb Guam, we'd start a war. That would be enough. That's... fuck. Okay. Well, there's that. I do want to help everyone and make sure your consent isn't completely manufactured. However, let's just be really clear about what had happened here. From the New York Times, correction. The U.S. airstrikes on Iranian-backed militias were over an attack that killed a contractor and injured, not killed a U.S. service member. The U.S. strikes were authorized by President Biden in response to the recent attacks in Iraq and continuing threats to the American and coalition personnel, said John Kirby. A rocket attack on the airport in northern Iraqi city of Erbil this month killed a civilian contractor with the American-led military coalition and wounded 6 others, including a U.S. service member and 4 American contractors. Now, I am not obviously in any way approving what had happened there. That is certainly a horrible thing. But can we be clear about what is a contractor? Because that again sounds like one of those wonderful liberal word pieces. It's like a U.S. contractor. So was he contracted to work on rebuilding hospitals? Was he contracted to build schools? Was he building road? What was being contracted? I mean, hell, was he taking the oil? Was that it? Was it U.S. oil? Yeah, some of you already know. Some people here know. Those are mercs. Those are mercenaries. You see, the United States hires people to do their dirty work. They're considered U.S. contractors. We're not entirely sure what their numbers are because that information is not public. But they're used in other countries to do things that may not fall under the purview of the good old US of A military. And imagine that. The US military that engages in torture, they do waterboarding, you know, that has done tons of war crimes throughout its history. But if that's not enough, you get yourself some mercs. You hire some mercs, you know? So there's that. There's that. Let's see what Canada has to say.
We'll look at the report that has been published today, but the fact remains that Canada wants the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to allow a full inquiry so that we can get to the bottom of what actually happened.
A U.S. intelligence report concludes Saudi Arabia's crown prince likely approved the operation to kill or capture the U.S.-based Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Oh, wait, what? This happened on the same day? No way. No way. Man, a lot of shit went down. Okay, so the U.S.'s own intelligence agencies have proven that it was in fact Saudi Arabia that ordered the hit on Jamal Khashoggi. Do you remember Jamal Khashoggi? He was an American reporter, a journalist, if you will, who was working for the Washington Post, and he was murdered by a foreign government. He wasn't just murdered; it was like stuff that would make Scarface blush. He was tortured and dismembered with bone saws. It was super gruesome and fucked up. And it turns out that Mohammed bin Salman ordered it, so they have proof. I mean, I'm definitely gonna believe this because, you know, the U.S. would have every reason to be kind of like, well, we don't really want to release this. We shouldn't let anyone know about this. But okay, so that happened. Biden's gonna take a strong stance. Then there's got to be something, right? Like sanctions, an immediate end of arms sales. I mean, that's pretty huge. Can you imagine if the Ayatollah had done this? If the Ayatollah had basically assassinated a U.S. citizen, a journalist, for reporting on Iran? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine if a journalist wrote about Iran, someone who had to be, like, I know you can't be a U.S. Iranian citizen, but let's just, amuse me for a minute here. Imagine that, a journalist who had written a disparaging article about Iran was suddenly murdered, or at least the hit was ordered by the Ayatollah of Iran, at which point the U.S. has to somehow respond, and the response would probably be war. That would probably, I'm guessing that would be the response, right? Okay, no, we've proved it, so war now. Now we're going to do a war. It's time for war because you did that. Instead, I think the response was a big old nothing. Did they do anything? Oh, there's condemnation. A lot of international condemnation. Chilling. Nancy Pelosi, strong language used by Nancy Pelosi. Chilling report from the intelligence community confirms what the world has long known. Jamal Khashoggi was brutally murdered at the direction of the top Saudi officials. The heinous event is an affront to the rule of law and basic human rights. We must reevaluate our relationship with Saudi Arabia. We must stand with POTUS. I mean, awkward time for Biden. Well, maybe it was good because, you know, the other day when Biden and Trudeau were kind of like facing cameras weirdly, like looking off into the distance and pretending to understand each other, even though Trudeau decided he had to speak French for most of that meeting. But they were like, well, we're both united. We're united in a lot of things in that we want to keep selling weapons to Saudi Arabia because they have lots of money and they pay good money. So there's that. To the surprise of no one, there has not been any sanctions yet. There has been condemnation, but they're strategic allies, you know? They're helping each other fight the war on terror. The findings of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence report, which concluded the Saudi Crown Prince approved the operation that resulted in the death of Khashoggi, will heap pressure on U.S. President Joe Biden to make good his promises to reassess the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Former President Donald Trump maintained close ties with Riyadh, particularly MBS, the country's de facto leader, despite Khashoggi's assassination by a Saudi hit squad at the country's Istanbul consulate in October 2018. At the very least, if this is not something that provokes change, then it's basically being tacitly endorsed. That's kind of it, right? It's kind of like, well, yeah, I guess you're allowed to murder our journalists and civilians if you buy lots of bombs, and we get to buy lots of oil. If we can keep doing that, then yeah, I mean, what's a journalist or two? I mean, don't do it a lot. And maybe not so brazen. It was pretty extreme. You didn't have to reenact Scarface just to make a point. You could have just do what the Russians do, like polonium. Come on, it's well, actually that has its own problems as well. I mean, fuck. when Canada spoke out, and not even aggressively, about Saudi Arabia, do you remember what Saudi Arabia did? They tweeted out them doing a 9/11 on Canada. I was like, okay, god damn. Well, maybe I shouldn't upload the story. Maybe this will make me a target. You know what? I take everything back. I pledge fealty to Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi Arabian monarchy, and long may they reign for an infinite amount of time. You know, here we go. That's That's that. If you want us to advertise your channel or work, please go to weareserfs.com and email us a 20 to 30 second ad, and we'll take it on to the end of one of our videos to help promote your leftist channel or progressive something. Whatever you do.
To our gods, Anra, Xander Corvus, Schlatsky, we look to the stars for your divine guidance. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are merely puppets for your amusement. To our lords, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Hans Josephine, Ryan Lubin, Timothy K. Meeblebeeps Jr., Bisexual Black Gamer, and Tofox, we shall carry your banner into the fog of war. To our Knights of the Round Table, Josh Mickelson, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Political Puppy, Jimmy Bignuts, Andreas Chiringuito, Yoppie, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Thomas Barrington, J. Fraser Cartwright, Goofalankius, Melissa Murphy, Nicholas Marks, Radical Maniac, The Great Pudini, Kale Kotka, Anthropophagic, Serene 42, Chronic de Hemphog, Phone Jenny, Incosin, Constance Joyce Lacheris, and Ramon Acosta, we drink with you and we salute you.